Hello, everybody. My name is John Solomon. I'm with the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, and I'm here today in the latest of our series of videos and podcasts with Jean-Christophe Le Toquin, or J-C as we all know him. He's one of the co-founders of CyAN, as well as a longtime serving president and board member. He's also an independent consultant based in France, but active internationally on topics relevant to cybersecurity and the fight against various forms of cybercrime online. So I'm here today to talk to JC about a number of topics in this, as we do in this series of videos. Today specifically, we're talking about the balance between privacy and security online, together take into consideration with the need for individual privacy, societal stability, and various other factors that are very frequently weighed off against security and privacy of individuals and companies. So JC, if you want to start off a little bit, this is obviously not a new topic and one that's been going for many years. I remember this conversation in the context of encryption as far back as back in the dark ages when I was in university. So if you want to give a couple of comments on what some of the major issues are in your view around this balance between security and privacy today.
Yeah, thank you, John, for giving me the opportunity. I think you're right. I mean, the topic is nothing new. I mean, basically, when I started my career, I mean, that was more than 20 years ago, it was already the same issues on cybercrime, bad content, how do we protect victims, and so on. And still, it feels like now, I mean, this year almost, we are at on a milestone, I mean, a turning point. And I don't know, I mean, regulation is coming. Things are getting taken much more seriously than before, and it feels like really we are the beginning of a new era, I would say, in terms of how we regulate content online and how we protect or may not protect privacy moving forward.
So you're very active, for example, in two separate areas that one might instinctively feel are at odds with each other in the topic of privacy as an individual right, and that's INHOPE, the global network of hotlines against child abuse, and Encryption Europe. Where do you see these topics maybe coming in conflict with each other? How can we reconcile some of the fundamental aspects of where they might come in conflict, especially given that child abuse is I'm not going to say used as, but often seen as kind of a red flag by privacy advocates as it's used by law enforcement to justify intrusive measures and regulations?
Yeah, I mean, true. I mean, actually my background is more on the cybercrime and child protection side. I mean, I'm a lawyer by education, and beginning of my career was to establish the French hotline against illegal content, and particularly child abuse material. And so has been one of my key focus for 15 years. And it's only more recently that I came to cybersecurity, and that was also why I co-founded CyAN. And encryption was an even more recent really role for me. And yes, I think I feel a bit alone in terms of being at the same time promoting technologies to improve the fight against cybercrime and detection of bad content and take it down and go after criminals. And without these technologies, I mean, we are screwed. I mean, it's not going to be possible to secure the internet without these technologies, whether they are hashing technologies for images and videos, AI, obviously, text analysis. So we need these super advanced and now quite mature technologies to detect criminals and protect us. At the same time, so I've been convinced that we need to protect privacy of our personal communication much more than before. I think the technologies that I promote on one hand are so powerful that I believe they should not really get into our private communication. I'm happy to elaborate on that.
So please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And maybe what I have to explain is indeed I'm in this strange situation of being the president of INHOPE, which is a global network of 50 hotlines combating or helping to detect and take down child abuse material online in public spaces. So on this side, I'm really for detection and prevention. And on the other side, I've co-funded actually together with Luxembourg House of Cybersecurity in Luxembourg, Encryption Europe, which is an alliance of 10 SMEs, European SMEs, promoting, free and, well, not free, but depends, but easy and safe encryption, and easy to implement. And with this alliance of SMEs, which is still very small, the goal is to really tell people that they must protect their private communication and deploy encryption. And the reason why I support these two sides is the same, and this has a lot to do with CyAN, meaning it has to, in both cases, I'm supporting and helping communities who are not properly recognized and supported. If you look at the community, including law enforcement, and all the hotlines and the trust and safety professionals who are fighting this type of crime. I'm talking about pedocriminal content. They feel not really properly recognized, not really protected, and my role here is to make them better understood, better funded, better supported. And later in my career, I was in contact with people promoting encryption, and it was funny to see, well, funny maybe not this word, it was surprising to see that this community that is perceived on the other side was actually sharing the same concerns, that they were feeling not recognized, not properly funded, and that no one was listening to them, or not many people. And that was quite a surprise to me. And this is why I say, okay, and with my CyAN expertise, because CyAN is about connecting different disciplines, then I said, okay, actually, these two communities which are perceived to be antagonistic and fighting each other, actually, well, not really fighting each other, first of all, actually they are in balance, and they share the same frustration, the same concerns, and if we want a safe internet, we have to get both of them understood by society and by the and protected by the legal framework.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the two sides. When from my first recollection of, I think, this conflict, this classic conflict simplified down to privacy versus security was when some of the older folks on this watching this may remember the U.S. government approach to encryption, particularly with regards to fear of state actors, China being one of them. I remember specifically the RSA and 5 lines of Pearl stickers that had this label is classified as a munition by the U.S. government, tongue-in-cheek warnings on them. The shift then seemed to go towards, especially in the United States, the UK, and mainly I think other Five Eyes countries, towards terrorism. The terrorists might be using encryption maliciously. I think the shift then went towards child abusers, child pornographers who might be benefiting from this. And I think it's only over the last maybe 5 or 10 years that the bad guy profile has started to include, for example, malicious actors, such as malware actors and ransomware gangs. And while the financial sector has been regulated increasingly in terms of know your customer laws and trying to shut down the endpoints, I think even though you're absolutely right that the two elements, mainly law enforcement and privacy advocates, to simplify it, even though everybody agrees that privacy is good, or most people, and everybody agrees child abuse is bad, I think there is still kind of that fundamental disconnect, because given that if you have privacy, you're always going to have bad guys abusing encryption technology, for example. That's the fact of life. So have you seen any progress in reconciling those two attitudes?
I do actually. I've been communicated a draft document, which I hope will go out publicly very soon from a regulator from a Western country. And this paper from this regulator was actually the first paper that I've seen was really making the balance, and was not totally clear that privacy should be protected at all costs, but was clear enough that there are so many avenues to protect the population. So to give you an example, some, and I was part of them, some claim that we should run some technology to detect what's wrong, like CSAM, like child abuse material, in private communication, because they say if we have these tools running, we are going to be able to detect people sharing illegal content, and then some of them are criminals themselves, I mean, who actually abuse children, and this is true. And then the question, what they say is, okay, because with these technologies, I mean, we can detect wrongdoers and criminals, let's implement them. The problem is that if we really implement these technologies to the full extent, and they should be, if you want to protect children from being abused in private communications, then there is no limit to the technology, and our homes will be turned in glass houses. And this is not something we want to do. So my point, and I'm happy to say that, I mean, my clients on the technology side and my clients on the encryption side actually do not fight each other, meaning that I think really this upcoming paper from this regulator would be along the same line, which is, okay, today our home are safe. I mean, no one is scanning in any shape or form our communication, at least, I mean, against our will. But when you go outside in the streets, of course, you have video surveillance. And then if you, I mean, commit a crime in the streets, then you get you get identified. And these cameras, I mean, were controversial at the beginning, but now no one wants to, I mean, everybody wants them because they bring safety actually. So my point is, when it comes to online world, we should, I mean, do the same. There is a lot to do to actually improve the deployment of technologies in public spaces, so that we can detect weak signals or threats on people. I mean, there is a lot of information available that is today not really, I mean, processed and analyzed. And then on the privacy side, on the personal communication, we have just to stop this using these technologies, because I mean, there is no limit to their power, and we have to be very clear on that. And I'm very happy with CyAN that I have this opportunity to do this, because I would say maybe only CyAN as a cross-disciplinary network can understand that we can have these different opinions at the same time and in balance.
So, I mean, I would take issue with the statement that you made about that nobody minds these cameras. I think one of the interesting cultural phenomena is that primarily in Europe, not only, but primarily, we tend to have more, I'm choosing my words very carefully, confidence in our governments and law enforcement than in a lot of other countries, that they tend to be respectful. But we have seen examples of abuse, maybe not as bad as, for example, with let's say Amazon in the United States, that readily gives Ring doorbell recordings. I have a Ring doorbell, you know, myself. It's pointed out to the road. But that is readily provides this to law enforcement, even some allege without proper warrants, right? And at the same time, even while most people they probably would agree that privacy is good, a lot of individuals, private citizens, especially non-technologists, still have this attitude of I have nothing to hide, and will readily, for example, put TikTok on their phones. Things like that. Or even though your average citizen is increasingly, I think, becoming sensitized, maybe through GDPR and similar rules, that their data is actually valuable, and becoming a bit less willing to just pass it on to just about anybody. Do you think people on the whole are becoming more sensitive to their privacy as a kind of a fundamental right? You know, in Germany, we've had this right to your own image for a long time. In photography and in public spaces as well. Is this a topic that is becoming more accepted by people? And how does sorry, it's a long question here. How does the average citizen deal with the sheer fatigue of trying to track, you know, all these people saying, hey, your privacy is being violated?
Yeah, no, very good question. It's a big question, but to summarize, I think, well, Europe, and I agree that, I mean, if I was not in the EU, I would probably have a different approach. I mean, if you look at Australia, great country, but they have an anti-encryption legislation. This is not a model. In the US, the checks and balance are not always as strong as we tend to think here in Europe. And Europe, because of its recent history, and when I mean recent, I mean 20th century, we had experienced what totalitarian regime can produce. And because of what we have done to ourselves and to our people, we have still today this concern about privacy and protection against, extreme political regimes, which simplify things and promise a lot and only produce disasters. So because of this history, because of we have a much stronger legal background, and we have more scrutiny on law enforcement, for instance, and this will play a huge role to protect and to be, in a way, a safeguard for the world in terms of how do you protect people, but without breaching, all privacy. And China is going to experience the challenges, obviously. Russia as well. The US, they are a democracy, a very strong democracy, but they don't have the same sensitivity to privacy, and it will change. But if you look at the global companies, who are the most vocal companies, tech companies at the moment, vocal in terms of promoting encryption? It's not Europe, despite Europe has a very strong legal background. It's Apple, Google, Meta, and companies that you would not necessarily consider as a safe haven for privacy. So things are really changing, and yes, I see progress. I see tech industry being more vocal on encryption than before. I see the Europe implementing a stronger regulation. You have the DSA, Digital Services Act, which will be a game changer for the fight against cybercrime. You have more and more online regulators being created in the EU, but also elsewhere, like Australia as a great regulator in this space. So yeah, I'm optimistic because people gradually understand that the technology has become so powerful that we really now have to think twice before we deploy it across the board, including, and you're right, including on public spaces, camera surveillance in the streets. People may not realize the full potential of these technologies, so they don't necessarily understand everything that's going on. And but still, if they are properly implemented and regulated, they are really a must in making our cities safer.
With I think your mentions of the FANGs, the big tech companies, is interesting because California has had the Consumer Privacy Act. I think it's for about 2 or 3 years now. And given that all these companies are in Palo Alto, in Mountain View, and various parts of the San Francisco Bay Area, even though these are not, a company's not a moral or ethical construct. A company is a company designed to make profit. Given all the conflicts that we see with, for example, support for at least tolerance of Chinese surveillance rules, I wonder whether the headquarters, so many of these headquarters being in California, which is really taking a page out of the EU model from GDPR with that act, is influencing that.
You have this, and then what I've noticed, because through INHOPE and the French hotline, because I also chair the French hotline against illegal content, I've seen over the years these companies evolving, and today it may not be perceived. I think it's not perceived sufficiently, at least, is that today they are, the way they think about their policies and the way what is their role, they are much more, I would say, even humble than in the past. And now they realize that they are, they cannot manage the complexity of the issues alone, and they are much more open to a stronger and more transparent framework, legal framework and regulation than before. And this is just coming, and it's not in place yet. Europe has still to develop and implement its new hotline online regulators, but it's coming. It's a matter of months, maybe a few years, and this is very positive in my opinion. And we will see this changing for the better. I'm optimistic over the years to come.
I guess companies respond to two things primarily, and one of those is market pressure, and the second is regulatory pressure. So I guess given that both of these seem to be growing in terms of at least a basic understanding of personal privacy and the value of your data and your person, that's going to be interesting to see how that develops. I have one, I think quite a big, last question for you. And I'm going to be very provocative here. And you know me, I don't have much of a filter about these things. I have this personal philosophy, this theory that the most dangerous creature in a free liberal democracy is the well-meaning idiot. And this is the person who believes truly that they're doing the right thing. And, you know, I remember several years ago being in a presentation by a former head of a major international law enforcement agency's cybersecurity organization, arguing passionately for mandatory legal backdoors to all encryption. And we've seen this since the Clipper chip, right? You know, if you take UK RIPA, for example, that mandates handing over the encryption keys themselves to law enforcement when asked, and not doing so is a felony. How do we, as I think, not only citizens, but cybersecurity experts, how do we continue to, I believe, on the one hand, educate, you know, back to your model of, you know, your two sides, educate the people on the privacy side that, yeah, there are bad guys who are misusing this. They're always going to be. But on the other side, the well-meaning, you know, professionals in law enforcement and the intelligence services, that sometimes the cure is indeed potentially worse than the disease, and that you have to be very, very careful in what you are asking for, at risk of opening up a Pandora's box of civil liberties violations. How do we do this? How do we all form this message in a way that the various parties understand?
So yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, ignorance, well-meaning people are indeed, I mean, the biggest threats. I think I don't see so much people who are really bad in a way, but I do see polarization. I think that's a big concern, and unfortunately, social networks unwillingly, because of the way they do business, I mean, they have fueled polarization, and that's meaning people think less broadly. I think our society built people very much in silos.
Conflict drives traffic. You know, same with traditional media. If it bleeds, it leads. So if you're running a social media, you want people to get in arguments online because that drives revenue. So maybe not even just inadvertently. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just to pick up on that.
Totally. So that's a big concern. I think the social networks gradually realize this, that it's an undesired side product of the technology, and this is creating a big threat for the community. If you look at CyAN, I mean, the purpose of CyAN was to break silos between people in cybersecurity, cybercrime, trust and safety, and I think this is super needed today to join a network where you know that you're not going to be with people thinking the same way or doing the same thing as you do, and that's essential. And we have to build a society which is much more open to others' views. I mean, that the philosophical response. And then when it comes to really specific topics, yes, indeed, I see like people defending children, saying, okay, if you are promoting privacy on personal communication, you are pro-privacy and I am pro-children. And this is the most unfair and scary comments I've heard, because when you start to really reject people because the way they think is different, and you are not authorized to think about children because you are in favor of privacy, I mean, this is wrong. And I see this pattern, and this concerns me. And I think the response is education and showing that we have to broaden the scope and never stay in silo, because of course, if you're only together with people thinking the same way, of course, then it's only fuels your feel of confidence, and then this is where you start to make bad decisions and exclude others, and this is a dangerous path and a slippery slope. So I hope I was, but then basically join CyAN and keep your mind open. And
good advertising. That's a great point. You know, I think one of the promises of social media was that, you know, like television in the 1950s, it was going to open up a brave new world and create online this agora of discourse, and instead it's really brought people into tribes. I think it's really important to remember, for whether you're a law enforcement professional or a privacy advocate or a private citizen, that being pro-privacy does not mean that you're also pro-drug dealer or child abuser or terrorist. Whereas being somebody who is actively fighting against these malicious phenomena that hurt everybody doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden, you know, a fascist who wants to destroy all individual privacy and snoop around people's encrypted communications. So I want to thank you very, very much for that constructive and informative discussion. This is obviously a very, very sensitive, very broad topic, and we're not going to solve the world's problems in a 20-minute fireside chat like this. But I do encourage, as J.C. said, anybody who is interested in this topic to have a look at CyAN. Our website is at cybersecurityadvisors.network. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I will link to everything in the video description, including the various initiatives that J.C. is involved in, and a few related sites that have information on this I wouldn't say conflict, but this dichotomy of views about security versus privacy. I hope that you will join us for future videos, and if you'd like to talk about, discuss a topic or an initiative or activity that you're involved in, please don't hesitate to let us know in the comments. Contact us at our website, cybersecurityadvisors.network. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks very much, JC. Take care.
Thank you, John.